listening to one of my very favorite composers, Gluck. Um, okay, so we have a little bit more um, global news to get to, and we were just Rizal was just asking me what I think about the latest offensiveness from dear leader, as Pastor Quick calls him. You know where that comes from?
Who?
Dear leader.
No.
Dear leader is what the North Koreans call their leader.
That's what they call Kim?
Yeah, that's what they call him, dear leader.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's what Pastor Quick
calls him now.
Yeah, dear leader.
Our dear leader.
Yeah. We always knew that he would. It's one of the most offensive things you could possibly say. We always knew that he's come real close to saying things like this before, and, there's, like, no end to it. There's no end to it. And, it's a good it's certainly distracted from a lot of other stuff that people could be paying attention to. But, I don't know. So, that is what I think of it. It's no surprise, but we still we gotta keep our shit together, and there's a lot of stuff flying around the internet saying, like, okay, well, Trump's a racist, and if you support Trump, you're a racist. And I certainly see the point of that, but we need some of these people to not vote for him, and people are defensive, and I know plenty of people that feel like that you're giving in if you're willing to give those people a chance, but I want somebody else to be elected.
Right.
And
I hope that happens. I just can't see him coming back. Everybody keeps saying, "Oh, I doubt it, though." I can't see it.
Well, a lot of us didn't think he could get elected.
Yeah, but I think that was like I said. I always still think it's a spite issue more than an issue that people really wanted him as a president.
Yeah, but that's I think that the spite issue could make people vote for him.
I think a lot of the ones that did vote for him, even though some of them make excuses for him, that I'm telling you right now, they're playing a game. They just don't want to admit that they voted a crackpot in. And watch, next election, I'm putting it out there. I don't think he's going to get elected.
Well, I hope you're right.
I think if anybody gets elected, it'll be another Republican, and it'll be not him. If they're gonna get another Republican,
it'd be awesome if if another Republican ran. That would be awesome, because that would pick up, that would pick him off.
So that's my theory, anyway, is that they're gonna if there is another Republican that comes in at this time, it will not be him. It'll be another Republican. So I don't think they're that stupid to put him back in.
I don't know. See, I was reading about Lindsey Graham. Was one of the politicians who was really critical of Trump at the beginning and was saying he was a terrible person and a racist and a liar. And at the time, Lindsey Graham's poll numbers were really low in his home state. And now that he's supporting Trump, he's polling great.
Exactly.
So, all these Republicans that were so critical of him are completely on his side now.
I just think they're on his side just because they screwed up. Some people are good at that. They will back up wrong stuff, and I think
it's quite possible. But I still don't think that it's. If it's gonna make them vote, I don't know if that's gonna make them vote for a Democrat. That could just make people even more stubborn.
They might not necessarily vote for a Democrat, so to speak, but I just don't think they'll vote Trump back in. That's all.
Well,
I'm
if they
saying.
just stay home, that's fine.
If they can stay home, that'll even be 10 times better.
Well, if they can just stay home and like not vote for anybody, that's fine. That's fine. Issue, like a lot of like Democratic idiots
can talk all that mess because most of these people who even like Trump even got did by Trump. You know what I'm saying? A lot of these people.
It's gonna have to. Well, we'll see.
I really have to see it.
If it hits them in the pocketbook, that's what it's gonna take. You know.
Well, I'm hearing it already is hitting some of them. They're just like I said. Some people are real prideful. You voted them in. It's kind of hard to say.
And health care. I mean, that's a big thing for people. So, okay. I'm gonna go back to a part of the world that we're pretty interested in, Habesha territory, Ethiopia and Eritrea, because I can't believe it, but it's been a year since they made peace. Mm-hmm. So, unfortunately for Eritrea, not much has changed. There's still compulsory military service and indefinite detentions, and so that is contributing very much to the refugee crisis because people are trying to get away from Eritrea. Mm-hmm. So then they're getting stuck in Libya, and we talked about this, in refugee camps, and refugee camp was just bombed, and they're getting, then they're trying to get to Italy, and so Eritrea remains a place people try to get away from. And so I talked about this last week, and there is still no sign of elections. And Isaias Afwerki has been in office for over 30 years, and no elections have been scheduled. And so what we've learned is because of this peace deal, opposition Eritrean organizations have been shut down in Ethiopia. And that's kind of a situation where, I don't know, it just seems like so much of the time it's hard to see a revolution, or there's always drawbacks. And so we've talked a lot about Abiy Ahmed, the progressive leader of Ethiopia, he freed the press in Ethiopia, but then during the past month there's been several nationwide internet blackouts, and so it's leaving people disconnected, businesses unable to operate, and journalists are prevented from reporting on events. So there's now more skepticism about Abiy Ahmed, about his reforms. So that's just really sad. I mean, God, can't anybody's reforms work? So moving over to Sudan, a power sharing agreement was worked out between civilians and the military, but there's already been a coup attempt from 12 officers and 4 soldiers have been arrested, and the transitional government was formed after mediation by the African Union and Ethiopia. So it's like half civilians and half military, and there's supposed to be elections there in 3 years. I sadly am not very hopeful about this. I think if you've got I just think that the civilians that are there are quite likely to be striking deals with the military, or there's just so much crossover, and people just don't like to give up power once they've got it. So like with the other countries, I'm just sending my prayers and just hopes to Sudan. This has been an incredibly brave revolution. People have been out there since for 6 months demonstrating. A lot of women are involved in this, and people should be free. People should be able to have the world that they want. And damn, we have problems in the United States, but sure glad I'm not in Sudan. I'm glad I don't live in Sudan. Mm-hmm. And okay, Bobi Wine, the ghetto president, is running for okay, he is a rapper in Uganda that was in the government, and he is running for president, and he's been arrested and tortured and put under house arrest, and he's just another really brave person and a real inspirational person. People really follow him because of his music. So, all I can say is, Bobi Wine, please don't get assassinated, because Yoweri Museveni in Uganda should be taken down. I don't hope he. I don't want anybody to get assassinated. It's not assassinated, but some of these people, they just won't step down. Mm-hmm. And Bobi Wine is, it's another place with a major youth population, and so Bobi Wine, we are really, really hoping for you, hoping everything for you. So, okay, one of the things that so the House of Representatives just passed a resolution condemning Trump for his latest racism, you could call it with him. And so one of the things they were discussing last week was reparations, and Cory Booker, who's running for the senator from New Jersey, who's running for president, has played a big role in this. And one of the things that he's talking about doing, and if you no, he's not going to be elected. I don't think I'm not supporting him for president. I don't think he'd be a very good president, but I think he's a good guy. He's talking about granting clemency to to old prisoners. Doesn't that make it okay? Right, because there are the elderly prison population is just huge.
Right.
Isn't it?
Right.
And I bet a lot of those guys have dementia.
I can see that.
Because dementia gets, you're more likely to get dementia if a real risk for dementia is things not changing very much. If you're in the same environment all the time and don't see much, you need to, people can exercise, but yeah, so that's a really, really serious problem. And man, it's I don't care if somebody's been in prison and they have dementia, they're not if they're not going to be a menace to society, just release them. It's
depends on what they did.
Well, yeah.
I hate to say it, but.
Well, no, non-violent.
Right.
Non-violent offenders who over 80 or something.
Well, if they're non-violent, they shouldn't even be in. It makes me wonder, why would they be in there that long?
Well, there's some people with really long sentences, long drug offenses.
Oh yeah, I forgot with the 3
You forgot?
laws. I forgot about the 3-strike laws.
He works in a prison.
Yeah, I keep forgetting about that. But Obama did something with that when I first started working there. He released a lot of people.
He did, but that wasn't. He did it because he's president.
Yeah.
But he didn't. But it's not like he could take care of that. He didn't. He wasn't able to pass any laws about it or anything.
But he released a lot.
Well, he did, but a whole lot of people that. There's still a hell of a lot of people in prison.
Yeah.
And
he really released. He released a lot of people.
Well, a lot more people have like aged.
Yeah,
have been aging since then. I mean, I'm talking about some of the seniors and old people. So you could really see a difference in with him releasing people.
Yeah, it was. They were releasing a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
They were releasing, like you said, with mostly like drug charges. It was like crazy how people was in there.
Yeah,
like you said, 3 strike laws for little bits of marijuana. It was stupid.
Yeah.
It's stupid. But he released a lot of people.
Well, that's good. Because,
most of the ones I see in there now that are in there that are old, they're lifers. So,
yeah,
I'll be honest with you, as of now, I don't know too many people in there who are in there for life for drugs. I don't, everybody I've known who's in there, it could be other people, but I'm saying it's not like, if you go up to someone who's in there for a long time, and they're like, hey, they probably killed somebody. Or, there's not too many people that, I've got caught selling marijuana 3 times. So I'm like, it just, you don't
that's good.
hear that.
You need to, clear the backlogs and all that. Because, they still, as more states legalize marijuana, they need to go back and look at some of those crimes. And, they need to look at, there's the whole, different penalties for crack than for cocaine and that whole thing. That Cory Booker was talking about that.
Right. I'm trying to figure out with California is how, I know with the prison system, how they're gonna work when like marijuana is legal.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the jobs don't want to make it legal. Like, it'll be legal for you to smoke it.
Yeah.
But at work, you can't, like, it's a catch-22. So let's say you smoke it.
Yeah.
And it's legal to smoke. But they drug test you at work, you can get fired.
But what if it's medical?
Nah, they do.
Yeah.
At least in the prison.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you get a drug test and you do marijuana.
Yeah,
that's it.
That's.
And there's a lot of jobs like that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's tricky.
How that's going to work in
it's
the
a
long
real
run.
tricky legal conundrum for them because I don't know. See, the thing is, I don't like drug tests, but I kind of feel like, okay, well, it's there. I think people are entitled to have that as a condition for employment. It's not like they're you're not discriminating by saying this is a requirement for the job.
Right.
I don't think.
Oh, that's gonna. I don't know how that's gonna work. That's a hard one right there.
It's a really hard one. Particularly since alcoholism, since so many people are alcoholics and have a lot of problems because of alcoholism. That's what's fucked up.
Right.
It's
going to do the same thing like alcohol. I guess you could say similar in a sense because if you go eat alcohol is legal, but if you come to work drunk.
Yeah, but alcoholism is. If you're an alcoholic, then you have problems.
Right.
Like say, a lot of cops are alcoholics, and so that's gonna. So yeah, they're they're probably not drinking on the job, but if you go home every day and get totally drunk, that's bad for your mental health. It's bad for your physical health. So. That's kind of that's the problem. It's still, alcoholism is still a serious health risk, even if you're not drunk on the job.
Right.
And so, so that's the problem. Alcohol contributes to people not feeling well, but they can't. People are allowed to.
Yeah, that's a hard situation. I don't know. I don't know about that one on the marijuana side of it, though. That's going to be some craziness.
Well, yeah. Well, shit. And it's not just, I wonder if they do they drug test for opiates?
I'm sure they do if they really feel they need to. When you work at a prison, they can drug test you anytime they want.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah.
They have a way of testing the prisoners, so I'm pretty sure if they want to test you.
But if it's prescribed, if it's prescription drugs.
Yeah, I would think that if it's prescription.
Yeah.
If you think you're gonna take it, I would say you better have proof or maybe bring it with you to work in your car. So if they ever say, what's this? And you can say, well, my doctor prescribed it to me.
Yeah.
Then you can show it to them. Then they can at least say, okay. But, that's assuming. But I think if it gets that far to where they want to drug test you, there's probably, was doing some strange stuff.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah, you'd think, and then if somebody's having once somebody starts to become a real severe alcoholic, they have like shakes and stuff like that. So.
And you see someone working and they're extra jittery or they're acting real funny style. That's a different story. I don't know.
Yeah.
Can't be in a prison like that. I hate to say it.
One of my brother's relatives was a cop for many years. He was a cop. His son's a cop. As soon as he retired, he started smoking weed. So.
At least he waited until he retired.
Well, yeah.
I'm not mad at him for that. But at least he didn't do it while he was. Oh gosh.
Well, but that's part of the problem. So many cops are alcoholics, and I think it's unfortunate. I think if more of them could smoke some weed at night and chill out, they wouldn't be so trigger happy. I mean, because I think that, the reason, like, to me, when I think about cop shootings and I think a lot of them are just so freaked out. A lot of them are just so freaked out and crazy that, like, they see somebody move their hand and think like, oh, he's going to shoot me. And so.
I think they need to figure out a better training.
Yeah, they do.
Because, I agree with that. I think a lot of them get freaked out.
Yeah.
Then I think they should look more into people's backgrounds. I think even go as far as not just criminally, just to, like, even if they fight, kind of have to look into, there's I don't know, like, situations, like, racist situations, like, how are they, how have they been through school and through their life dealing with other races and stuff like that.
We'll try and...
Because some people might be kind of biased, like, like we all know, towards black people for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So he wants to become a cop, and you know what I'm saying, because he's a cop now, he feels like he can do whatever he wants because his whole family, his whole life, they kind of really weren't, digging black people like that, and so they grow up bringing that into their job.
Well, now they can look at, and now that stuff they can see a lot of time on social media.
Right.
Go back and look.
There was something recent I saw on there. I don't know if you saw the one with the fireman in Philadelphia. There was a little kid, I guess a 13-year-old kid, and he was outside playing in a park. Mm-hmm. And I guess he was around a truck. I think it was one of their fire trucks, or just walking or playing around it. And the fireman took it as him, like, doing graffiti or writing on the truck, but he wasn't. Mm-hmm. And so I guess he told the kid to stop or something, so the kid ignored him and went to go play on the playground. Mm-hmm. And so the fireman jumped on top of him.
Oh my God!
And kind of like held him. Yeah, and they saw it was on film. He was holding him down and talking crazy to him. And I guess the kid hit him to get him off. Get off me, and hit him. And the guy was like, he hit me, and he was like holding this 13-year-old kid down. He's like 40-something years old.
Firefighters are big fuckers too.
Yeah, and I'm like, dude. And so I guess when you see the video, you only see certain video. You only see part of it. So at first I said, okay, let's see what happened. Mm-hmm. Let me give this guy a benefit of a doubt to see if the kid was hit him. But then come to find out, he just thought the kid, because I guess the kid, I'm assuming because the kid was black, he just assumed the kid was drawn on this truck. Yeah. And it turned out he wasn't. The kid wasn't doing nothing. So, and from what I read, the fireman got suspended. So I don't know how far they went from there, but
well, they should suspend people and do some trainings and stuff. Because one of the things they're trying to get for the Vallejo cops is cultural bias training. They talk about that a lot. I've been reading a biography of the civil rights leader Ella Baker, and she was getting people cultural awareness trainings for cops in the 1950s. I didn't even know they talked about like bias training for cops in the 1950s. I didn't even know they understood about things like bias training and all of that back then, but they did. So it was like, shit, if Ella Baker could get that for cops that long ago.
They should have, they should deal, they should have that. Cause,
yeah.
You're in certain areas,
Yeah.
It helps them out. Because to me, I don't know, it's just, if you're a cop, and let's just say your whole life, let's just say you haven't grown up around Mexican people.
Yeah.
You might have a bias towards them because you're not, you never grew up around them.
Yeah.
And so that could not, to me, that would be a bad thing. And then all of a sudden they put you on a beat, which is a Mexican neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You might not treat them like normal people because you never grew up around them. And so I think that's a good way. They should do stuff like that. They should have trainings like that.
The last city council meeting I went to they were trying to present a proclamation to the chief of police that was leaving. And so everybody knew this was going to happen. It was supposed to happen like 4 weeks ago, and people were there all ready to protest, but they postponed it. And they just they issued the proclamation to Chief Badu, and people were there all ready to protest, like relatives of the people that have been shot by Vallejo cops. And so people started yelling in the audience, and he killed, and so once again, so they wound up shutting down the meeting and making everybody leave, and people were outside, like, Willie McCoy's uncle and Angel Ramos's sister and other people. So then they started the meeting again, and they had people come back in, and the city manager has been here for like a year and a half. He's a white guy, and so he went into this speech about how, Chief Badu was my worked for me. Like, fuck you, he doesn't work for, I mean, people don't work for you, city manager. I mean, fuck that. They work for us. I mean, they're public they're
supposed to.
Well, yeah, exactly. They're supposed to. It's like, okay, you're just this, like, big, you're a bureaucrat, dude. You're nobody. The city manager does have a lot of. So he started talking about how great Chief Badu was, and and it was like he was talking like nothing had happened, and like those people hadn't been there. And I just feel like it's not, completely disrupting and shutting down meetings isn't necessarily how I would choose to do something. But I haven't had a relative get shot dead by a cop, and I'm not gonna judge people. I don't judge people for how they are gonna behave when your loved one's been killed like that, and when it's been denied, or I don't know. I feel like I don't know, with some of the relatives, I don't know if they want to meet with the cops or people, but you feel like, have any of the cops, has anybody talked to them? Has anybody expressed condolences? Or, and so then other city council members were talking, and just like shut, and because like Mayor Bob was a cop. I don't really expect him to do that much, to say that much about it. But then one of the city council members was like, well, I've like ridden around with the cops, and I've seen how hard they work. It's like, yeah, well, the cop isn't gonna like shoot somebody when you're in the car. Right. Nobody's disputing that the cop. And then somebody else talked about, okay, this was a real big irony to me. Somebody was talking about how Chief Badu did such a great job meeting with people about making Vallejo a sanctuary city. And so, to me, that was just incredibly ironic because I happen to think that the whole sanctuary city is just a way for local politicians to look good. I don't think it's very significant. But like, okay, here you are, like, praising this guy for helping to get a sanctuary city designation for Vallejo when the African American community does not feel safe with Vallejo cops. Okay, this is the citizens, the people that live here. So yeah, so they all went over that. So what were you gonna say?
Oh, I forgot.
Okay. It was and yeah, so there's a couple lawsuits going on against them. So yeah, and then we've been having disputes with people. Disputes about Mayor Pete, who had, like, the idiot, like, running for president from his teeny little one-horse town, and because some of us were having these arguments about it, or I try not to, but some of the people in the gay community, like, just think he's great, and they're going like, oh, blah blah, he's talking about having a plan to. It's like, no, you don't. This is something you should have, like, when you were elected. You're supposed to come in with a plan when you are elected. None of this stuff is new. So okay, so so there's another case that I've been following in Italy, and this is sad. It's about a girl named Emanuela Ornella, who was in Italy, and her father worked for the Vatican, and she was kidnapped 36 years ago. And there's been blame for the Sicilian Mafia, the KGB, and the plot to assassinate Pope John Paul. And so on Thursday, the latest trial led. So they went to try and, like, dig up her bones, and they went to look for her body in a tomb where some princesses were buried. And see, that was the thing. The team went in there, and the tombs were empty, and even the bodies of the remains of the dead princesses were missing. I'm so fucking morbid. This was the part I thought was kind of interesting, like creepy, like grave robbers in the Vatican. And so they were, but then staffers found bones when they were inspecting other spots, and the princesses so it might be Emanuela or the princesses from like 150 years ago. So yeah, see, this is sad. This is like recent. This girl would be like my age now, and so this is sad. This isn't like the story about Queen Victoria's stepson being sent home. This was sad. So okay, I'm gonna swing into taking advantage of this format here to talk about the presentation I'm going to be doing this Sunday. And so this is about the archives of Bayard Rustin. And so, are you going to be there?
I'm going to definitely try and make it.
Okay.
I can tell you that.
You get to listen. You listen to me more than anybody. So it's all stuff you know, but other people don't. So I'm going to be talking about the trip I did to the archives of Bayard Rustin at the Library of Congress, But I'm going to have to, in order to do it, I'm going to go back and talk about even more about how the whole process for getting there. Because I started learning about archiving 10 years ago, and it was a very long time before I was going to go actually archives, because I just didn't feel like I could do anything productive with it. Mm-hmm. And that, okay, well, this was would be interesting, but what was I going to do? It wasn't like I would be finding new stuff. So I'm just kind of going back to the beginning of, like, one of the things that first got me interested in archiving, and or some of the things that are really important to me, was when I was interested in poetry and studying poets. And when I was learning about poets and artists of the 20th century and noticing that a lot of them were gay, and so, but a lot of the ones that we knew about were wealthy. So that's always made me think, like, okay, does it mean, well, you always think, like, okay, well, are a lot of creative people gay, or do more gay people wind up getting onto a creative path because we don't really fit in? So that's just an age-old question. But when I was looking at certain creative people in the 20th century particularly, I just would wonder a lot about gay people that weren't wealthy, and just anybody whose life isn't recorded. And so that's,
keep talking.
Okay, that's always been my my interest in archiving, is trying to find the records of people whose lives weren't recorded, and looking at, and if they were, looking at who's asking questions and who's answering questions. And so and the classic example to me is in the film of about Bayard Rustin's life, where somebody said that somebody who knew Bayard and worked with Bayard said that Bayard spent all of his time with white people. Well, it's a white person saying that, and I never believed that. Bayard was a social, exuberant person that had lots of interest activities, had lots of friends. Why would he not be spending time with other black people? I never believed that. And it turned, to say nothing of the fact that there were other this was people from the Peaceniks, to say nothing of the fact that there were other black people in the peace movement. So I was like, okay, well, think about it. Why do you have this? And so then, and then in a different source later on, I did find out more about other friends of Bayard. So it's like, places where Bayard, his other social connections and all of that. Like, of course he hung out with other black people. So that's just a real classic example of who asked this question and who answered this question, and how do you push your mind a little bit more to think about what you haven't seen? And how do you look at somebody? How do you look at someone? How do you put together what you know about somebody and draw conclusions based on that? And the other example is Doug Hammarskjöld, who is another person I study, and doing that. This was all stuff I worked on before getting enough knowledge to visit the archives. Who was the Secretary General of the United States, and he's considered all these descriptions of him say that he's frequently described as like a lonely, melancholy person, very reserved, didn't let anybody get close to him. And all the people, pretty much almost everybody, but then people will say, those are all people that worked with him being interviewed, and they'll say like, well, he spent a lot of time with artists. Well, the artists didn't talk with him about him as much as professional people did. And so here's somebody that was out at the theater or listening to music almost every night. He loved mountaineering. He was friends with tons of he was a member of the Nobel Prize Commission and was very involved in the arts and literature. I mean, it's clearly he kept a divide between his professional life and his social life. But even then, I mean, it's known that he was friends with, he liked children. He was really loved by the children of some of his friends, and he was close with his family. And a book of his reflections were published after he died, and so people make it's like you can make assumptions. It's like if somebody publishes a book of poetry or something, and people will make assumptions about them based on what's in the poems. Well, that is just one piece of it. And as an ex-poet, I can say a lot of the time, what you write about stuff when you're feeling bad, okay?
Right.
And so judging his character by these books just does not make sense. And so one of the things and another book that was really influential to me was the biography of Malcolm X by Manning Marable. And Manning Marable and his students reconstructed every day of the last 2 years of Malcolm X's life. That is just the dream project for an archivist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's stuff that you can say like, it's boring until it's interesting. You're just looking at it's just the ultimate who, what, like, okay, where was somebody and what were they doing? And so his travels were extremely interesting, and so that's some of the stuff that Professor Marable was able to find. And for all these years, people had read the autobiography of Malcolm X like it was a biography, and it's not. It's like it was written very deliberately and crafted very deliberately to get across a certain message and a certain image. And it's a piece of his biography. It is not a piece, like none of us are completely, it needs to be a piece of information, not the information. Okay, so those are some things that got me really interested in just what you can learn from looking at just asking, okay, who was asking, and what did they miss, and how can you push your brain a little bit more. Okay, so so what I was doing with Doug Hammarskjöld, because his life was pretty much pretty well documented. What I was doing was, oh man, I'm looking for. Okay, so one of the things I was learning about with with Hammarskjöld was researching the people around him. He died in a plane crash, and so, you know, I mean, as a sort of outside historian and archivist, my big thing was just trying to find stuff that other people hadn't found. So any original documents, original photos. So I was looking for information about other people that died on that plane, and I was able to find them, about some of them. And again, Dag Hammarskjöld was, I mean, he wasn't just the Secretary General of the United Nations. He was the son. His father had been a Prime Minister of Sweden. He was born in a castle. I mean, he was always going to have a lot of attention.
Right.
But one of the people who I've researched and been able to highlight was named Francis Ivers, and he was a young man from Ireland who was serving in Congo with a lot of people from Ireland were in the United Nations, and a whole bunch of them went to Congo and served in different parts of Africa during decolonization, because Ireland had been colonized. So there was a kinship there. So Francis Ivers was only 28 years old. He was just kind of a foot soldier, and he died on this plane crash. So I was able to get information from his relatives and put them on put photos and plaques about him on my website and on my Facebook page about the Hammarskjöld tragedy, and just getting across that, I mean, Francis Ivers was just very important too. There was a plaque erected at his church 25 years out to mark the 25th anniversary of when he died, and I have a picture of that. And then the other person who I've researched was Vladimir Fabry, who was a lawyer that died on the plane with Hammarskjöld. And one of the things that's so interesting about him was that he was from a Czech, I have to check, a Slovak family. Okay, this is confusing, but anyway, he was from the era of, he fought the Nazis, and then he needed to escape Czechoslovakia because of the communists. So that generation was just very, very heroic. And Hammarskjöld had experienced, he was the Minister of Economy and in Sweden. So his generation had experienced World War II, and then somebody like Vlado had experienced communism and had needed to flee his country because of that. So the United Nations really meant a lot to these people. They really believed that they were going to be able to make a difference. So I was able to find, I connected with a relative of Vlado's and Vladimir Fabry's, and so I was able to find pictures of him and information about him to display, because I mean, his family was poor. He wasn't it's written about that while he was working in the Congo, he was also managing his family's business and trying to take care of them as well. So that was Vlado. And then there was one woman who was on the plane. See, I don't know if I should even be getting... I'm trying... See, this is helping me figure stuff out for the... hi, Ascari. Hi, Giacomo. for the presentation, because this might be getting into too much background, I guess. Okay, so that's more stuff about Hammarskjöld. So one of the other projects I did was indexing the Beacon Hill Times, and that was like and indexing 100 years of notes of memorabilia from the Mount Baker Garden Club. Mount Baker is a neighborhood in Seattle, and that was interesting to me because in the past, in that era, and this is something at era, there was a lot of, that was how women could express themselves and try and do something meaningful and interesting with their lives. So one of the things I was always looking for was stuff about like ladies' social clubs and all that, because a lot of the time that was where like smart women would wind up just trying to do something with their minds and with their lives. And that was my interest with I'm spacing out. What was her okay. I'm just going blank for a moment. There was, oh, this is so embarrassing. Esther Lalonde. She was Alice Lalonde. She was Dag Hammarskjöld's secretary, and she was the only woman on the plane on the Albertina that died. And so, of course, I was interested in her because she was the only woman. But in that era, being a secretary at the United Nations would have been a much more interesting life than a whole lot of other possibilities for women at that time. So that's why I'm always interested in people like her. And so what I put down in any of my writing was like, well, if she'd been alive now, she probably would have been the fucking Secretary General herself. You know, I'm sure she was and so I found out that, and she had requested to go to Congo. And all of these people knew that this was a very dangerous place, and they were there because they wanted to help, and they wanted to. Congo had just become independent from Belgium, and they wanted to but there were no skills, there was no infrastructure. They were trying to get the country going so that the people of Congo could be independent and run their own country. And so but I found out that, Alice had been everywhere. Not only had she been in Congo, she had been in Suez, she'd been in Gaza, and she had been this is wild, the secretary for Count Folke Bernadotte, who was assassinated in 1948. Count Bernadotte was Swedish, like Dag Hammarskjöld, and he was enlisted to serve and he was the head of the Swedish Red Cross, and during World War II negotiated the release of 60,000 Jewish children. And so he was sent to the Middle East to try and negotiate a treaty between Israel and Palestine. See, this shit's been going on for a long time. And so he went I first learned about him when I started studying Ralph Bunche. Ralph Bunche was the world's expert, and I have an event coming up for Ralph Bunche later this year. We've talked about Ralph Bunche a lot here at Global History Night, and we will talk about him more. But so he was working with Count Bernadotte because Bunch was an expert on colonies, territories, protectorates, all these different names and categories for big countries bossing around little countries and bossing and pillaging. So that's why Ralph Bunche was working with him. So they were there trying to meet with everybody and trying to solve this problem. And Count Bernadotte was assassinated, and he was assassinated by the Stern Gang, who were the more law-abiding, peaceful Israelis that were trying to solve things, and there was the Stern Gang that was terrorists and liked to bomb shit. And they were dressed in their military uniforms and said that, set themselves up as a checkpoint. And so Bernadotte's car stopped, and they went up to the side and shot him. And it said that those people some of them wound up becoming members of the Israeli government, and Ralph Bunche needed to work with them. And so it's an example of how somebody like Ralph Bunche was able to make very difficult decisions and was able to put aside his own feelings to talk with to work with people. So and then Ralph Bunche was his second in command. So then Ralph Bunche took over the Armistice Project and was able to negotiate the armistice between Israel and 4 Arab nations, for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1950. But anyway, Alice Lalande had been Count Bernadotte's secretary. So basically, she worked for Count Bernadotte, and she survived that, but she died with Doug. And so Count Bernadotte's death has never been... his killers were never brought to justice. They never... And so... It's pretty interesting to me that she was with both of them. And so I have not been able to find information about Alice Lalande at Rhodes. That was where Ralph Bunche negotiated the peace armistice with those nations. But she must have been there. So that's periodically, this reminds me again to look for that. But she was a secretary from Montreal. She had a brother and a father, and that's all I was ever able to find out about her family. And then there was after she died, a collection was taken up to name a maternity ward in a hospital in Gaza after her, because she'd spent a lot of time there. And people took it very personally, and they did not have an easy life. They worked all, in some place, like, they were living in settlements. It wouldn't have been very comfortable. They worked all the time, and they were doing something important. They really believed in what they were doing. So those are some of the people I felt were important to honor, in addition to Hammarskjöld. And so that was and so it's all important and having to do with the Bayard Rustin project, because so the other part about the Dag Hammarskjöld project is that I was able to go back and do some of my favorite questions was when the plane crashed, there were people there were people that saw what happened, and they were Africans who lived near there. His plane was flying from Congo to a place that was then Rhodesia and is now Zimbabwe and Zambia. His plane crashed in what was then Rhodesia and is now Zambia, and that's where they were going to meet. He was going to meet a rebel leader who, Moise Tshamba, who was in Katanga in South Congo, and what he was trying to do, and Tshamba was backed by the Belgians. Like, basically, as soon as independence was declared, the same people were all still there trying to protect their economic interests. And so the Belgians were trying to get civil war to happen in Congo so that independence wouldn't happen, basically. So some of the people who saw the plane crash are still alive, and their testimony at the time was completely discounted because they were black. And so so over the past few years, they were interviewed again about what they saw and properly acknowledged, and the information was recorded. And so one of them, the people that was interviewed, was named Mama Kankasa, and she was identified as the wife of a freedom fighter. And I was like, fuck that. So I dedicated my Dag Hammarskjöld website to Mama Kankasa, and I listed her bio the way you would the way you would write somebody's bio. Okay, Mama Kankasa was, did this, and she testified in this, and Mama Kankasa was married to Mr. Kankasa, I forget, who was a freedom fighter. So it has to do with, we have choices. It has to do with how you identify people. And I didn't change anything. I didn't make anything up. I simply looked at this with a different perspective. I simply, well, everybody has a perspective. I just needed to question things more. Like, okay, you can talk about somebody this way, or you can talk about somebody this way. What are you going to focus on? Which is why I really disagree with how Bayard Rustin is spoken about. Unfortunately, members of the gay community, mostly the white gay community, have seized on him and made his story about being gay. And he has, he's been presented as, the man that was pushed aside because he was gay. And there were incidents in his life when that happened. He had a long career. He did a lot of things. He had a very full life. He was very successful and astounding. And so somebody should not be known by their worst moments. And that wasn't, and it's just, and I particularly, there are so many African Americans and black people that should be better known, that I just don't think it's fair to give Bayard that moniker. A whole bunch of people should, and I think I know he would agree with me. There's a whole lot of people that should be better known. And when I saw the film, Brother Outsider, in 2005, I went along. I believed that version, that I went along with this, like, oh whoa, oh wow, here's this great person that I didn't know, that I didn't know about, and it must have been because he was pushed, and with the whole line, because he was pushed aside because he was gay. I come to realize, like, well, no, because I did not know shit about the civil rights movement at all. So I had, like most people, I knew who Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were, and that was it. So so now when I have people say that to me, well, I'll say, okay, well, what I'll say is, like, okay, you not knowing about something doesn't mean other people don't. It's not true that people don't know about Bayard Rustin. He is mentioned, he is given a lot of acknowledgement in A. Philip Randolph's biography. And, a lot of people don't know who A. Philip Randolph was. The labor leader, who organized the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, who was a mentor and a father to Bayard Rustin. So, you have to, when you learn about a person, you need to learn about the people that surrounded them. You need to learn about their community and their family and their context, because you just don't understand them in an isolated way. And in a way, we're all more, in some respects, nobody's that great, or just, there's astounding people have other astounding people around them. So it's been a real long process for me, with way back when I started learning about Bayard Rustin, because I needed to go deeper, and to understand him, I needed to learn more about his colleagues and his friends, and his world. And I'm really interested in his work in Africa. So so that's how I learned about Ralph Bunche, because I was interested in Dag Hammarskjöld, and I was interested in Bayard Rustin, and then then I learned about Ralph Bunche. So I was like, okay, well, here I am, because I had Bayard that I was learning about, and the whole UN thing. So I was like, okay, well, here I am learning about the United Nations. Here is an American person, an African American person, who was a big deal in the United Nations. He is the only U.S. citizen to be a big deal in the United Nations, so it would certainly benefit me to learn about him too. And Dag Hammarskjöld, again, he was this Swedish aristocratic guy, and Ralph Bunche was born in 1908. He was born in Detroit, and then came to L.A. when he was a teenager, and so his story was more familiar to me, or I could relate to it more, because of both literature, 20th century literature that I read, and just other people I knew about in the 20th century. And so I was interested, so I became really interested in connections between Bayard Rustin and Ralph Bunche. For a couple, they were both just brilliant, multi-talented. They're both good athletes, and Ralph Bunche did. I mean, Bayard could have did some professional singing, and Ralph Bunche was also a good musician. And scholars with Bayard, I mean, Ralph Bunche was one of those like bang, 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 like valedictorian of high school. Then he went to UCLA. Then he went to Harvard. Then he went to Howard. And with Bayard, I think, this is the sort of situation where being gay makes a difference. I think like he did not. I think he may have. For somebody like him, it would have been harder to follow a more traditional path. I mean, Bayard followed, who knows? He might have had the same life, like been a radical in the same way, if he weren't gay. But that definitely contributed to it. I think, because there's just ways that you just don't fit in, that you don't, like, when you're moving along and everybody is moving along in a certain direction, you just don't always feel part of that. So, but they both had big minds. They both were really strategic. And so for Ralph Bunche, his work with the United Nations, he viewed it as contributing to civil rights in the United States. He was always operating on different levels, and so there were times people would be like, "Oh, whatever, Ralph Bunche isn't helping civil rights because he's in Congo and Cyprus." It's like, well, no, that's not true. This was a world issue. This was the liberty and freedom is all connected. And so, like with Bayard Rustin, he worked in the peace movement, and he traveled around doing peace workshops, but it was to train people for nonviolent resistance to segregation and to Jim Crow. He was never doing things in isolation. Neither of them, they were never doing things in isolation. So I was able to find one photo of them together, which is in my presentation, and there's photos of Selma when Ralph Bunche was at Selma, when they're in the same frame. And so that was my big question one of my big questions when I met Congressman John Lewis, because I've been really interested in the connections between diplomacy and nonviolence. Diplomacy is it's the same principles apply. You just not arguing, trying to solve things, trying to frame things, and trying to understand people. And so I told Congressman Lewis that I was looking for those connections. He agreed with me. They were real similar. I said, did you ever see them together? I mean, you never know. And he was a little bit like, yeah. But there is a photo of that Congressman Lewis is in the photo that has Bayard and Bunche in it, which is pretty fucking cool. And I found out that Congressman Lewis, because Ralph Bunche had been really well known, that's one of the things that's interesting to me, is it's a double layer of history, and that's something we'll be talking about at this event. He's an important historical figure, and his social impact is important. He was part of popular, like my friend Brenda remembers him, and Congressman Lewis remembered him. Congressman Lewis would cut out pictures of Ralph Bunche from magazines for school. So he remembered that. So it must have been. It's cool because looking at that, it must have been really exciting for Congressman what he was then, John Lewis, to be near Ralph Bunche. But my friend Brenda remembers Ralph Bunche, and she remembers when Ralph Bunche won the Nobel Prize. And when I went to talk about the project at the NAACP, everybody was like, "Oh yeah, Ralph Bunche." And when I was talking, and you talk to like senior African Americans, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, Ralph Bunche, yeah." And so, it's not that people are forgotten or something. You just simply need to ask the right people, basically. So the hope is for. And see, I'm really interested in this. Because I've been going like, well, what do you remember about him, Brenda? I mean, what do you, he was real handsome and charismatic, and he was, like, he presented at the Academy Awards, and he was on a lot of magazine covers and stuff, but we're going to do a family screening I'm hoping when we do the screening of the Ralph Bunche documentaries that some of the elders will be able to talk about what they remember about him, what was significant about him.
I remember when you did your show over at the Empress.
Yeah.
I mean, they did a good job. A lot of people came out and spoke. It was cool.
Yeah, good.
Pretty good. It was pretty interesting.
Good.
I've been to, 2 of your showings? Two different things.
Yes.
Not of the same thing, but I've been to. The shows, those are pretty interesting stuff I never even knew about. So
yeah.
Y'all, if anybody's listening, check it out. You should really go to check it out.
Good.
And see about it.
Well, yeah. Well, it's going to be on the first Wednesday of October.
You know what you should do?
Huh?
You should think about giving away a ticket or two on your show.
I might.
For your listeners.
Well, I'm trying to raise. Well, yeah, that's one of the things. I'm trying to raise the money to make the show free. So. Yeah.
I'll talk to you.
Well, yeah. Because a big piece. Because I wouldn't been. Because Pastor Quick is going to be speaking. He's a Ralph Bunche scholar. So, I think like there's definitely going to be people from the church that want to come, and so I don't want people to feel like they need to pay to go. So anyway, but yeah, I'm working on all that. But I'm also going to do an event. I'm also going to screen it at the Naval Historical Museum that Saturday, and make that kind of be like more of a youth screening, and that will be free.
But you remember your last show, you gave, last time, you almost had, it was overseated, so, give out a pair of tickets, to some of our listeners, so they get a chance to see it. I think it would be a good idea.
We'll see. We'll see. I don't know, man. I just want everyone to come.
She's modest about the show. It's a good show.
It was
really good. You learn a lot from watching it. It was really good. The stuff that some of our people did as black people, you just don't expect it. And people in the South did a lot of stuff, man.
Yeah.
They're like, you just don't even expect. You don't hear about this stuff in California.
Yeah. So
that's why you need to come out and check it out. I'm not going to bust it.
Yeah.
Bust the bubble on it, but it was good.
Yeah, good. And then, but it's just so much about for me like having a setup where people can talk about their experiences. So there might even be like other events connected to it all, because the thing is, this documentary, it's 2 hours, it's kind of long, and then Pastor Quick is like he's a scholar. He's worked on a book about Ralph Bunche. Mm-hmm. So I'm just gonna let it roll how he wants to do it, because it'll be fun to hear him talk, but it's also really cool to get for people to talk about their experiences. So yeah. and then the Saturday event will be probably, I mean, it'll be like youth oriented, I like to refer to it as like a family screening, not just youth screening, because I don't know, like, I mean, I'd love to have people like come with grandparents and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes. Okay. So, what else am I going to be doing with, okay, so with Bayard, I'm going to be, one of the things I'm going to be doing was talking about, because some of the images and stuff I have are from when he was in California, and so then my friend QR, who knows who a lot of people were in that material, he told me before, but I'm going over there tomorrow to get some of the lowdown from him, and because QR knew people that he heard Bayard speak, and was at some of the same events with him, and he knew some of the people that there's some of the people in New York that are in Bayard's correspondence. So that's really, and then QR knew Ralph Bunch's daughters. So this is a really, really cool thing. I mean, I love stuff like this. Okay, so that's, I'm going to be talking about man, see, some of the stuff of the archiving and stuff I did was so long ago. Like, I mean, it was before I don't have pictures of it. I have spreadsheets, actually, instead of just taking more pictures. Like, I actually did have to take more notes back then. The problem with doing stuff at any archives is that, well, you can bring your computer, but you can't bring a pen. You can't bring any notebooks. You have to just use they just have like little pieces of paper and pencils that you can use. You can't have any pens with you, but you can't even bring in a notebook to write stuff. So I think I just had so I would be taking pictures with my iPad and writing down notes on their little pieces of paper and trying to, I don't know, man. I mean, I was there. I did 2 separate trips and was there for a couple days each time, and I wish I could go back. But, I mean, I'd like to go someplace else to do more, because what's strange is that Bayard's archives start in 1941, and he was born in 1912, so I don't know where all the stuff was from before then. I mean, some of these archives could theoretically just be like everything. Right. And I know other research has been done, so I don't know. I would love to be able to, but I mean, it was just so much fun. I mean, just trying to, it felt very, very peaceful in a way, or just sort of to be with, I did kind of feel like I was engaged with Bayard, and so, all right, are we, okay, so this was another, thank you so much to Ascari, and to, I will see you soon, and to Giacomo for listening, and to Max, who was listening, and to everybody.
Yes.
Yes. And we'll be back in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, we definitely will.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, everybody.